Hello, everybody. My name is Przemysław Nawrocki. I work for WWF Poland in river and species conservation, and I would like to present to you a concept of river self-maintenance, which is specific to Poland, but I believe it may have some application in other countries. So I hope that the Polish example will be inspiring for you as well. Okay. So why do we need river self-maintenance concept? The answer is because in Poland, primarily the concept of keeping rivers in a technical state predominates. And this concept of keeping rivers in good technical condition doesn't work in context of nature goals of Water Framework Directive, of Habitat Directive, Black Directive, because it is contradictory to goals of these directives. So we have an alternative in form of river self-maintenance. That means instead of situation like this, that we dredge the river, we may have rivers like that, left to natural processes. In Poland, dominates common opinion that a good river is regulated river, that rivers should be kept in good order, and that is well reflected, unfortunately, in Polish river laws, the basic legal act. Accordingly to Polish water law, we can keep rivers in only one way. We may do something on the river, like we may deepen it, dredge the river, we may cut trees and bushes along the river, we may remove vegetation by mowing and other means. We actually are obliged as a country to remove the beaver dams as well. And the only exception from this list of activities which are actually harmful to the river ecosystem is removing some man-made obstacles, like, for instance, garbage, which can pile up in the river. So it's very important to know what is the scale of this maintenance work defined, as I said, in Polish water law. The trouble is that water law doesn't put obligation on water management authorities to monitor these activities. So the only source of information about that actually came from scientific activity, from the inventory of tenders conducted by Warsaw University and WWF Poland, what gave quite a disturbing picture in this period of time between 2010 to 2017, at least 37,000 of kilometers were dredged. Apart from that, there were always maintenance work carried, like removing natural vegetation, trees, bushes. Mowing vegetation was even more common than dredging. That means that nearly half, or more even half, small rivers in Poland were affected by this maintenance work. That means a large scale of deterioration of ecosystem of small rivers, but not only this is the problem, because when we compare this map of dredged rivers with intention to accelerate water outflow from small catchments, with the map of drought risk, we will get a picture like that. That on this map dominates red and orange colors, and these colors on the map of drought risk indicates area which are extremely and highly exposed to the risk of the drought. That means this mass scale of these maintenance works, which are somehow forced by Polish law, actually negatively affects also drought management. Environmental consequences of this maintenance work, understood as keeping rivers in technical conditions, directly impacts biodiversity among species. Especially affected are on lowland all the species which are related to bottom habitats, especially muddy habitats, like for instance mussels, tick-shelled mussel, which is on red list in Poland, or weatherfish, lamprey larvae, while in mountainous areas, such works can destroy, for instance, spawning grounds of salmonid fish by removing all the gravel deposits which are used for spawning. So consequences of this mass scale of maintenance work are enormous, because they impacted, as I mentioned, minimum half of the length of smaller Polish rivers. Such work, especially dredging, which is very commonly used to be very commonly used, also permanently lowers hydromorphological status of the river by 3 to 4 classes right after the dredging, and this effect may stay for minimum 10 years or longer. There is also important aspect related to public finances, with maintenance work understood in this way like described in the law. That first, taxpayer money is spent on draining the river, then removing natural vegetation, strengthening banks with riprapes, dredging the river, and then the same public money is spent on repairing hydraulical structures, because in such case, sooner or later, there will be damage by the river trying to regain natural hydromorphological status. And then, especially having in mind climate change, deepening the rivers in the framework of maintenance work also leads to drought, deepening drought risk, then compensation for losses for farmers, and also having in mind, and these works are mostly done in small rivers and small catchments, that outflow of the rivers of water from the small catchments results with increased risk of floods in bigger rivers. So it's contradictory to modern rules of flood management. So this maintenance work also contribute to paying compensation for flood. So we have, in this case, sort of a vicious circle of maintenance cost. It can also be a situation like this, that first we use taxpayer money for removal trees which shade the river surface, and then we will have to pay for constant mowing of exposed river banks, because access of light will encourage herbaceous vegetation to tree. So we can break this vicious circle, and we can think about using on a large scale this alternative concept. Instead of keeping rivers in good technical condition, we may focus on keeping them in good hydromorphological condition with use of natural processes. That means we should focus on river self-maintenance. And this concept of river self-maintenance is pretty simple, because first of all, it requires determining what type of economic and social functions currently the particular stretch of the river is performing, and then assessing how these functions will change in the future, and answering some questions. First of all, can the same economic and social functions be performed as well or better by a river which bed and riparian vegetation is shaped by natural processes? Next, is the river currently in sufficient good hydromorphological condition to maintain dynamic channel balance acceptable due to these economic and social functions the river performs? Next, if the river is transformed by, for instance, training done in the past, does it have potential to reach acceptable balance of a channel shaped by natural processes in reasonably short time? If not, what intervention in hydromorphology will be necessary to, from one hand, to accelerate river restoration, and also which need be conducted to perform the social and economic value. So we must determine the acceptable level of human intervention into the river. And then it will be good to also to judge if the river can perform other important functions, like, for instance, shedding the riverbed, which is very important now, having in mind the temperature of water in rivers often trespasses, even in Poland, lethal limits for salmonid fishes. And for instance, if the river can play important role in absorption of compounds of nitrogen, absorbing flow of nutrients from arable land. That means function of a buffer zone. However, it's good to keep in mind that if you want to apply this concept of river self-maintenance, we must remember that there is a very important difference between mountain and lowland river. The architecture of the mountain river is based on gravity and generally rocky bottom, while architecture of small lowland river is first of all vegetation, alive or dead, like for instance fallen trees. So even small mountain rivers is powerful enough to really quickly restore its channel, but it also means that these rivers need a lot of space, and they are often unpredictable. And this is example, Stradomka River, before riverbed training, after riverbed training, and after the flood. The flood actually removed all this heavy hydraulic intervention riprap. While lowland river, they need a lot of time to recover, even from the relatively light intervention, such as strengthening the banks with some wooden structure. So small rivers of that type may need even 100 years or longer to restore natural hydromorphology. So what criteria should we use to select these rivers, which are the best candidate for self-maintenance? First of all, they should have high degree of naturalness of the channel. They should have well-adopted zone of trees and bushes, which can stabilize the river banks and shade the water. And it's good, of course, to get information about the slope, because that will be indicator how dynamic the river is on this particular section. In order to introduce this concept efficiently on the scale of the country, it's necessary to have high resolution hydromorphology assessment. However, this hydromorphology assessment carried for the purpose of water framing directive will not be good enough. As for instance, in Poland, we have only 3,000 water bodies to be monitored to European Commission. And these water bodies, these are only the major rivers, which is about 33% of all rivers. So we need much higher resolution. And since Polish water management authorities were not interested in developing such hydromorphology assessment, it was conducted initiative of scientists and NGO, precisely Poznań Life Science University and WWF, to prepare such assessment. And this is the first result which we achieved in the year 2016. We analyzed more than 80,000 2-kilometer long stretches of the river, and this picture shows that was for the first time actually in Poland available such a study, that we have a problem with hydromorphology. On this map, we can see dominance of red and orange color. That means that these are these stretches of the river which are heavily impacted by human interventions. Actually, this hydromorphology assessment covers only half of the kind of standard indices used in the assessment, because it's based on results which should be comparable to habitat quality assessment in river habitat survey method, this British method of hydromorphology assessment. It covers only the measures of degree of naturalness, but it will not include the impact of all this civil engineering structure, let's say, means the riprapes, bed strengthening, dams, etc. So the all over picture will be even worse than this. But nevertheless, it shows what we can achieve. This is a continuation of this work we carry. This time, this is a detailed map of the slope of the river, which indicates in which part of the country we may expect this very, very powerful and difficult to control rivers, and on which part of the country are these rivers which can be much more quiet, can be left alone without much risk that they will change the bed rapidly, for instance. So this reddish color in southern part of Poland indicates this area where we expect presence of this most powerful river, while this deep blue, these are the rivers with the lowest values for the slope. This map indicates state of river corridor measured by the index which assess to what degree the river is meandering. And again, we can see that Poland is not even in this respect, that we have relatively well-preserved rivers, especially in the southeast, in this respect, but surprisingly enough, the most impacted rivers in that sense are in eastern part of Poland, which among Poles were considered to be rather pristine and wide areas. However, what is good to remember about these mountainous rivers, that usually they keep relatively well-preserved river corridors, but they are dammed. There is a lot of obstacles on their way. So that means that all over assessment of naturalness of the riverbed will be much worse than that what is indicated on this map. While looking for these areas with potential for river self-maintenance, we should consider also development of trees and bushes along the rivers because, as I mentioned earlier, they stabilize the bank. This map actually shows the stage of assessment which we carry in this section as monitor for Water Framework Directive. That means these are catchments of water bodies, only 3,000 of them, but it still gives some ideas what we should expect. Surprisingly enough, in this respect, the best developed stands or bush zones along the rivers are in northern and western part of the country and also in south east. However, what is important from the perspective of this river self-maintenance concept is how precisely are developed these trees. Are they close to the river bank? Do they shed efficiently the river surface? And the answer we will get from detailed analysis of river shading, which we conduct now with the same resolution. That means this detailed resolution. That means that we will analyze approximately 100 stretches, which will be between 1 kilometer to 8 kilometers long, depends on the size of the river. And this is results of pilot research on Bub River in Sudeten Mountains. And it brings us good news and bad news. The good news is that more than 50% of these smallest rivers, actually streams, which are close to the source section of the river, 50% of sections of these rivers are covered sufficiently by crowns of trees. Yes, and with this larger river situation is a little bit worse because only 40% of these river stretches are sufficiently covered by tree crowns. That means that it's not that bad because nearly half of them are covered by trees, but the bad news is the other half is not covered. That means problems with too high water temperature. Very important also is to know the naturalness of river valley. And again, this the same picture, the best developed in this respect are sections of Poland in northwest and to some degree in southernmost corners of the Poland. What is nice to know that we have already first examples of this self-maintenance concept in practice. The first came from the agreement between Poland and Czech Republic that instead of strengthening bordering meanders of order with heavy riprapes, both countries agrees to leave this meander free and agree to change the border following the natural movement of the riverbed, which was made a tourist attraction. Next example came from the project conducted by regional water management authorities in Krakow, WWF of Poland, and Institute of Nature Conservation, that while removing obstacles in Biała River, it's a kind of mountainous river, 20 hectares of land were bought to allow the free moving of the river corridors. A similar concept was applied by the same water management authorities and NGO Abovo in the project on Raba River. So we have the first encouraging examples, but we have one more opportunity in Polish program for for actually surface water restoration. There are already proposed some measures oriented towards achieving this river self-maintenance. I will not elaborate on this because Paweł Pawlacik will talk in details about that aspect of activity of Poland in improving management of rivers. And now coming to conclusions. I think that this river self-maintenance concept in terms of ecological effects can be pretty similar to areas which will be covered by passive conservation, because it limits human intervention to minimum while it's relying on the natural processes. It also gives economic benefits, because instead of doing unnecessary maintenance work, we can leave quite a substantial part of river stretches left without maintenance, which I propose that it can be called simply passive maintenance. Also, which is very important, that this concept can be instantly implemented as a part of code of good practices of river maintenance. It's actually one decision of head of water management authorities in Poland will be necessary to decide that these areas should be located and designated for this passive management. That means less money spent annually on management, this heavy management, which requires machines, and was also conducted, unfortunately, on really natural rivers which didn't need management at all. It's very important to keep in mind that if the rivers should be kept under maintenance scheme, active maintenance scheme, this scheme should eventually lead to river self-maintenance. That should be the goal. To do it that way, like for instance, plant some trees on rivers which have now problem with too intensively growing herbaceous vegetation. Instead of mowing them, plant some trees which will eventually shed the riverbed and strengthen the banks, etc. And at the end, encouraging conclusion from our preliminary research is that about 40,000 kilometers of rivers in Poland can be introduced into this self-maintenance scheme. So that means quite a lot. And if this concept is accepted by Polish authority, it can be part of national river restoration plan. So thank you very much for your attention, and let's leave the rivers alone. Let them take care for themselves, especially having in mind that for Upper Drava, in this area which we are, there was recognized very serious threats like bottom and bank erosion, accumulation of dry material, beaver dams, etc. All the works all the threats which needs maintenance work. They were included in the water maintenance plans for years 2016-25. Hopefully, never implemented. But maybe we will learn from our colleagues from Drava what happened. Okay, thank you very much.